When you're ready.
Looks like you're alive.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining us this rainy afternoon. We are going to start out this afternoon with the University of Maryland Center for the Environmental Science. Sarah Baker will be our analyst, and we have Dr. Peter Goodwin, the president of UMES, Mr. Lynn Wren, vice president for administration and finance, and Mr. David Namazi, chief of staff. Sarah, we'll let you go first.
Okay, you just get my screen up here. Okay, so overall, the allowance increases budget by 2.9 million to 51.1 million. As shown in Exhibit 1, expenditures related to personnel account for over 66% of the total spending. Exhibit 2 shows UMCES's proposed budget. State funds increased 12.7% or 2.9 million, of which 1.8 million is to restore the 21 BPW reduction, and another million is related to the general salary increases. Turning to R&D expenditures on Exhibit 3, expenditures have increased from 52.2 million in 2015 to 56 million in 2019, of which state and local grants and contracts comprise 46% of the expenditures. Exhibit 4 shows the number of bay restoration projects UMCES has participated in, and the number of projects in any given year is primarily dependent on grant funding. So overall, the numbers of projects have ranged from 214 in 2015 to 175 in 2021. And finally, the recommendation to see the U.S. for system-wide recommendations, and that concludes my presentation.
That was short and sweet.
Yes, on a Friday afternoon.
For a Friday afternoon. Any questions from the committee? I don't see any. Thank you very much. Okay, next we have MSDE Early Childhood Development, and Wagner is our analyst, and we have Dr. Mohammed Chowdhry, the state.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I think are there agency people signed up to testify?
Let me see. You could be right. You could be right. Yes, I do have some signed up. Okay, sorry about that. Let's go back and do that. Okay, do we have David Namazi?
Dr. Peter Goodwin will be leading our testimony.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you and good afternoon or good morning, Chair King and members of the subcommittee. As it is a Friday, I promise to be very brief. So thank you for inviting me to this hearing to support the operating budget request for the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, or UMCES as we're better known. I am here with members of my team, as you pointed out, to assist with any questions. Dave Namazi, our Chief of Staff, and Vice President for Administration, Lynn Wren. You do have my written testimony, and I'm just going to highlight a few points this morning. Firstly, I would like to thank the Senate for your long-term commitment to higher education in Maryland, to the University System of Maryland, and to UMCES. And I would also like to thank Ms. Baker for her always thoughtful and comprehensive analysis. We respectfully request the approval of the Governor's FY23 budget related to UMCES and the University System of Maryland as submitted. UMCES has been at the forefront of environmental stewardship for nearly 100 years, and we remain focused on working with all interested parties on environmental solutions for the unprecedented challenges of the 21st century, particularly related to the recovery of Chesapeake Bay. I'm going to highlight just 3 issues where we're working with our state agencies and multiple stakeholders. Climate change, as you're very aware, is having a major impact on Maryland, and we support Maryland's efforts to better understand the changes we are witnessing and developing mitigation and adaptation actions. As just one example of our multiple climate research activities, UMC's developed the first of its kind coastal adaptation report card at the request of the Coast Smart Council and the Department of Natural Resources. This was released last month, and the report assesses the progress being made in Maryland's coastal counties. And oysters continues to be a major focus for us. Oysters help protect shorelines from erosion, improve water quality, and are a critically important part of Chesapeake Bay ecologically, culturally, and economically. In this matter, UMC's partners with the Department of Natural Resources and NOAA to develop the science to inform management actions. And the Horn Point Oyster Hatchery produces a variety of oysters for use in oyster research, oyster restoration, aquaculture, and educational projects. Over the past decade, the hatchery has deployed approximately 1 billion oyster spat per year to the waters of the Chesapeake. And finally, I'd like to highlight our work in workforce development. As you're very aware, UMC's trains the next generation of environmental scientists, business leaders, policymakers, natural resource managers, and educators. But UMC's is committed to ensuring that the face of the future environmental workforce reflects the face of Maryland and the underserved communities that are often the most impacted by their environments. Examples of our work in this area include the Seas Alliance, supported by the National Science Foundation, and the NOAA Living Marine Resource Cooperative Science Center in partnership with the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. So I did promise to be brief on a Friday, so thank you for the opportunity to be here with you, and I welcome any questions that you have.
Okay, thank you very much. And do you have anyone else that needs to speak?
No, only unless there's questions from your
Okay.
committee, Madam Chair.
Okay. Do we have any questions or comments from the subcommittee? I don't see any. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, next on our agenda, we have the MSDE Early Childhood Development. We have Ann Wagner as the analyst. We have Dr. Chowdhry here today. Welcome, Dr. Chowdhry. Ms. Ari Amerikaner, Chief of Staff, Mr. Justin Dayhoff, Assistant State Superintendent, Financial Planning Operations and Strategy, Mr. Stephen Hicks, Assistant State Superintendent, Division of Early Childhood, Ms. Donna Gunning, Executive Director, Office of Policy and Fiscal Analysis, MSDE, and Dr. Deanne Collins, Deputy State Superintendent, Office of Teaching and Learning, and Mr. Krishna Talur, Deputy State Superintendent, Operations. So Ann, take it away.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and members of
Thank
the
you.
committee. I will try to share my screen. Oh, looks like I can. Great. So let me go ahead and show the operating budget analysis for the early childhood programs in MSDE. So this year's budget decreases by about $365 million or so. And the largest budget change is in one-time COVID-19 federal funding that's ending in fiscal 22. Under the performance analysis section on page 4, this exhibit shows MSDE's annual measure on the number of licensed childcare slots. Most recently, you'll see the number of licensed slots decreased by almost 5% in fiscal 21. And that's the largest reduction over the period as the pandemic has worsened a lot of operational challenges facing childcare providers, including workforce shortages and increased operating costs. This chart doesn't break out the providers by childcare centers and family childcare providers, but MSDE has indicated in the past that most closures have recently been affecting the family childcare providers. And from January 2020 to November 21, 81% of statewide program closures were among those family childcare providers. So then moving on to the budget discussion, in fiscal 22, there was a significant amount of one-time federal funds that were authorized in the American Rescue Plan Act. And that was for childcare and the state's early childhood systems. Of this funding, Maryland's award is $502 million, and that's split over 2 different uses. About $309 million is able to be used for stabilization grants for childcare providers. And then $193 million is more flexible, and that's awarded as a supplement to the state's existing childcare and development block grant. So first, to discuss the stabilization grants, the use of these grants for the providers are listed on page 5, and that's mainly personnel and operating costs. And after accounting for the funding that can be used on administration, MSDE is distributing about $286 million in stabilization grants using federal funds. And that's over 2 different application cycles. So the first cycle, the application had closed on August 6th of 2021. And MSDE had originally intended to get $158 million in funding out by September 30th. They did face a slight delay in hiring the contractual staff that processed these applications, but the grants were dispersed on a rolling basis throughout October of 2021. For the second application cycle that just closed on January 23rd of this year, so MSD is currently processing the applications and expects to award the remaining $128 million by March 4th. And then I will note that MSDE did streamline some of these application processes and has taken provider feedback into account and has made more customer service available in the second application cycle. So then, in addition to the federal funds for stabilization grants, the budget includes a proposed deficiency that would add another $50 million in general funds for additional stabilization grants. Based on the governor's announcement about that funding, the use of those funds appears similar to the current uses of the federal award, but it is asked that MSD discuss whether any new uses will be included, as well as the timeline for distributing the general funded grants. There is also a DLS recommendation here. It's just to adopt committee narrative that would request MSDE submit a report on the total stabilization grant awards and then how the providers are using these grants. And then returning to the other piece of the American Rescue Plan Act funding, MSDE's spending plan for the $193 million is shown on page 7 and on to page 8. I won't go through each of these, but I would like to highlight this item where the department says that it plans to spend $21.8 million to expand a major IT project. Originally, this major IT project would have only replaced the Child Care Administration Tracking System, or CCATS, but because of the availability of additional one-time federal funds, this project is actually being expanded to affect multiple early childhood data systems. There is an appendix in the back of the report that goes into more detail about this project, but I just wanted to highlight that there's also another DLS recommendation for a narrative that requests a report from the department on how this project has been redesigned. So then I'll move forward into the fiscal 23 allowance. The biggest budget discussion there relates to early childhood initiatives funded as part of the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. As I'm sure a lot of you know, fiscal 23 is the first full year of implementation of the blueprint. Exhibit 4 on page 12 shows the funding levels for early childhood programs in the allowance, and that compares it to the estimated mandated funding levels in the blueprint legislation. This is broken out into a couple different categories. I won't go into all of them in detail. There is an appendix, again, in the back that breaks out the funding in the allowance compared to the mandated level for each of these programs. But I'll just say the supportive and intervention services category includes things like expanding Judy centers and family support centers that are now called PATI centers. And it also includes funding for the infants and toddlers program. And then workforce and program quality development, that includes things like bonuses for providers that publish in the Excels program, and then other programs like credentialing programs and tuition assistance for childcare and early education employees. But overall, the fiscal 23 allowance does include funding to meet the mandated levels for those categories. You'll see the biggest difference is under the pre-kindergarten formula shown in the blue bars. And here you'll see that the allowance includes about $68 million above what was projected in the fiscal note, so above that mandated funding level. So I'll talk about the pre-K program specifically next. So this shows the difference between what was projected at the fiscal note and then what's actually budgeted in the fiscal 23 allowance. Under the blueprint bill in fiscal 23, the formula would have been based on providing a certain per pupil amount for children from families with incomes at 300% federal poverty or lower that were enrolled in full day public pre-K programs. These children would have been considered tier 1, and the full per pupil award would be covered with a state and a local share. However, due to implementation issues with local school systems not being able to determine which of the children they serve are at 300% federal poverty or below, the budget instead funds the total enrollment in full day pre-kindergarten in public schools, regardless of the children's incomes. So that's why you're seeing more than 5,000 additional children being funded in fiscal 23 over what was projected. And then that's also causing the $68 million difference that shows the budget is exceeding the mandated level. I will also note that this methodology is kind of similar to the pre-kindergarten supplemental grants that were in effect before the formula. And because that grant program was based on providing a state grant for all 4-year-olds enrolled in full day pre-kindergarten. So it as the kind of transition period, while there are these implementation problems, it is based on a similar methodology as in past years. At the bottom of page 13, there are a few other aspects of implementation for the publicly funded full day pre-K formula listed here. The MSD is still working through a lot of these aspects. I will point out though that considering I'll just highlight one of them. This item relates to how Chapter 36 has a phase-in schedule, so that beginning in fiscal 25, MSDE would implement a sliding scale to provide a portion of the per pupil funding award for children with families with incomes between 300% and 600% of the federal poverty line. And so those families would provide a family share of the cost of their pre-K program. So because the fiscal 23 allowance includes funding to pay the full per pupil cost for those students, it is departing from what the phase-in schedule would have been in the blueprint bill. And so considering this change in the phase-in schedule, we did ask MSDE to discuss, jumping to the right place. We did ask MSDE to discuss first, the local school system's ability to determine the 300% federal poverty level for fiscal 24, and then whether they'll return to the phase-in schedule that's outlined in statute, and then the timeline for that. And then finally, how the state's $68 million discretionary enhancement, that funding above the mandated level, affects the local share of the formula, and then how the local share will be calculated. So then turning to the personnel section, the allowance shows a decline of 25 contractual positions. These were mainly funded with American Rescue Plan Act funds. The department is asked to discuss how it will ensure that it keeps up an adequate contractual staffing level, as there is that proposed deficiency that adds $50 million in additional stabilization grants. So we just asked about the contractual staffing levels. And then the one issue for your consideration today relates to the Child Care Scholarship Program. This first exhibit on page 18 shows recent trends in program enrollment. It also highlights where there were a couple programmatic changes over the past few years that have affected enrollment. So that includes expanding income eligibility in August of 2018, and then raising provider reimbursement rates to the 30th and then the 60th percentiles in the beginning of fiscal 2020 and fiscal 21. So what this line shows is the year-over-year growth in this program. You can see that leading up to the pandemic, enrollment was growing pretty rapidly. The year-over-year growth was in the double digits and had actually peaked around over 40% at one point. But then it was slowing, but because this is the year-over-year growth, enrollment was still increasing. The rate of growth was just slowing down leading up to the pandemic here. But then in March 2020, and since then, obviously, there's been a large drop in child care scholarship enrollment. And since November of 2020, the year-over-year growth has actually declined in the double digits. So clearly the pandemic has had a strong impact on enrollment in the child care scholarship program. And I will point out that this is happening at the same time that the budget for the Child Care Scholarship Program has increased substantially. In fiscal 22, the budget grows with $81 million in American Rescue Plan Act funding allocated to this program. And so this funding is budgeted for some additional programmatic changes. So first, this $81 million was budgeted to increase income eligibility for the program from 65% of the state median income to 75%. And then the other programmatic change is that their MSD plans to increase provider reimbursement rates from the 60th percentile of market rates to the 70th percentile. And then I'll just note that, as you can see, this program is predominantly funded with federal funds, mostly from the Child Care and Development Block Grant. But in fiscal 23, you are seeing that the program would receive an additional $10 million in general fund support. And again, this additional funding is being budgeted as enrollment is greatly reduced. And then also as the program has received substantial federal fund support in a very short period of time with that $81 million in fiscal 22. And then considering that the new income eligibility and higher reimbursement rates have not actually gone into effect yet, MSD is asked to explain how much of that $81 million they actually expect to spend in fiscal 22, and then whether the programmatic changes would be retroactive to any certain date. There's also a request that MSDE and RESI, which is its vendor for research and data analysis for this program, that they should also provide cost estimates and enrollment projections under the new income eligibility and provider reimbursement rates. There is a DLS recommendation here to add budget language restricting the $10 million in additional general funds in fiscal 23 until MSD can provide a report on first their actual fiscal 22 federal fund spending, and then the projected costs of expanding income eligibility and raising reimbursement rates moving forward. The last DLS recommended action is to adopt a narrative requesting quarterly reports on the Child Care Scholarship enrollment and expenditures, and then also if there are any waiting lists, and then its implementation of reimbursement rates and expanded eligibility. And so all those recommended actions are shown across pages 22 through, looks like 24 or 25. But with that, I'll conclude my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks, Anne. Any questions for Anne from the committee? I don't see any. Okay, Dr. Chowdhry, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Senator King. Thank you for also introducing my team. You saved me some words there. So they're with me here. So just in case, there's something that I forget, they're a lot smarter than me. So I appreciate you letting them come. Good morning. Well, I think it's almost afternoon. Chair King and members of the subcommittee, I'm grateful to you for your continued commitment to early childhood education. Thank you, Ms. Wagner, for your thoughtful analysis. I'm pleased to be here today in service to our pre-K and childcare communities. Maryland's childcare providers and early childhood educators, like their counterparts across the nation, struggled prior to the pandemic and have suffered throughout the pandemic, but remain the backbone to Maryland's recovery. This community helped ensure Marylanders could and can get back to work. This community worked diligently to ensure our youngest learners could still prepare for kindergarten and the early years of K-12 instruction. This community continues to provide service to Maryland children and families, even stepping in when families may not yet be able to afford payments due to job loss or deferred pay because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We must continue to prioritize and support our childcare and early childhood education communities. My department is currently rolling out more than $120 million in stabilization grants to support providers so they can support parents and young children. The fiscal year 2023 proposed budget includes an additional $58 million in stabilization funding. My department will work with providers to ensure these funds are allocated to meet their current and future needs so they can continue to support families and children. All of this comes at a time when the Blueprint for Maryland's Future fundamentally reimagines the way Maryland administers, monitors, and supports childcare and early childhood education. New credential requirements and the expansion of private provider opportunities and family preference mean we are now raising the bar for quality childcare and early childhood education. And at the same time, we need to increase access to the elevated early childhood experience for more children and families. MSD is excited to lead the charge forward with the implementation of the blueprint, and our capacity to do so is tied to the budgetary and funding provisions contemplated in the law and in the fiscal year 2023 budget bill. To that end, I will respond to the analysis. The analysis attends to three core themes, to which I will respond in turn: the implementation of childcare stabilization grants, the blueprint implementation of publicly funded pre-kindergarten programs, and the expansion of the childcare scholarship program. I have openly said, and I will reiterate here again today, that I am and will continue to be the biggest critic of our work and the biggest advocate for improvement. We need to acknowledge what we do, good and bad, so that we can constantly improve. MSD values, respects, and supports our childcare provider community, critical partners in early childhood care and education. Understanding that the Federal American Rescue Plan funds could not be released into the hands of providers fast enough, MSD sought to be one of the first in the country to release the stabilization grants and implemented an aggressive schedule to meet this goal. And we were within days of meeting our preliminary target. The process MSD relied upon for the first round of stabilization grants required new contractual positions to process applications and payments. MSD did not receive the appropriation for those positions until August. MSD acknowledges, however, that the department could have done a better job of anticipating the supplemental appropriation from the moment the state became aware of the program to better build a timely plan and process. Federal guidance for stabilization funds recommended the disbursement of at least half of the funds by January 1st, 2022, which MSD completed through its round one application window that concluded in fall 2021. In total, MSDE distributed more than $158 million to 5,206 providers in that round. MSD opened the second application window earlier than originally planned with a more streamlined application process relative to the first funding round. To implement an expedited plan, MSD moved up the grant window to January, sought feedback from the childcare community, including the Maryland State Child Care Association and the Maryland State Family Child Care Association, for input to make the application and application process easier and more accessible to the state's diverse range of providers. I began upon my arrival to strive for continuous improvement. I repurposed the existing position vacancies at the department to create core service functions to better serve the department and its stakeholders. As part of that effort, I created a new Office of Grants Administration and Compliance. That office revisited the grant application and proactively issued grant guidance, documentation to support the childcare community through the application process. We systematized fiscal processes and created efficiency within the financial team and accounting processes. And we pre-checked provider information in MSD's accounting systems to ensure MSD can quickly process payments for potential awardees. MSD provided 6 live customer support sessions to help providers through all aspects of the grant application process. MSD hoped these sessions would increase the number of providers who applied for the grants, reduce errors or issues in grant applications, and decrease grant processing times. As a result, MSD received more than 6,000 applications for round 2 payments. That's more than 1,000 providers than we awarded in the first round. We didn't change eligibility. We worked diligently to provide excellent customer service, responded to the needs of the provider community, and made the program more accessible. Now we have already processed more than $59 million in payments for more than 3,000 providers this round, and we remain on track to meet our target date for payment issuance to all awarded applicants. Again, MSD did this work without new positions, but through the repurposing of existing vacancies in the department. As the next round of proposed stabilization grants that are in the allowance as a $50 million deficiency, MSD is prepared to distribute the $50 million in fiscal year 2022 general funds for additional stabilization grants once the legislature approves the deficiency appropriation in spring 2022. MSD will elicit stakeholder input regarding the allowable uses of new state funds in preparation for releasing the application in spring 2022. Future funding of childcare stabilization grants is dependent on the state and/or federal funding. I turn now to the blueprint for Maryland's future. As the analysis notes, the proposed budget includes enhanced funding for pre-K. The enhancement in fiscal year 2023 is tied largely to the proxy data required to calculate the pre-K state aid formula. Tier 1 eligibility calculation requires local school systems to identify families at poverty levels above what it normally identified. Local school systems are adept at identifying eligibility for free and reduced price lunch, which is 185% of the federal poverty level. But at the tier 1 level, which is 300% of the poverty level, it's much more tough. To avoid undercounting students, the proposed budget reflects the count of all full-day public pre-K enrolled children, as well as the children enrolled in community programs participating in the pre-K expansion grant program. As Maryland moves to expand voluntary and publicly funded pre-K, and as noted in our pre-K implementation planning report, MSDE will work to develop and utilize a single application form and process for families to complete for early education and comprehensive services programs. This model streamlines the process for families so they can use one form and process for providing proof of documentation of income and assets, and can then find out the services for which they are eligible. Income verification for current pre-K programs occurs at the local level through program providers. Practices are consistent across both public providers, public schools, and private providers' community-based program. Providers may use free and reduced meal program eligibility or direct certification documentation. MSD anticipates that the formula methodology outlined in Chapter 36 will return in fiscal year 2024. MSD will ensure that local school systems are aware of the formula methodology outlined in Chapter 36, and that in fiscal year 2024, the state share of pre-K program will support Tier 1 students only. The fiscal year 2023 enhancement does not impact the local share of public pre-K program. The local share is calculated based on the formula in statute. Lastly, I want to address the expansion of the Child Care Scholarship Program and the role of the American Rescue Plan funds in that effort. MSDE will increase access to the Child Care Scholarship Program via two mechanisms. First, increasing the reimbursement rate, and lastly, increasing eligibility. MSDE will utilize American Rescue Plan funds to increase the income eligibility for families to 75% of the state median income, and to increase provider reimbursement rates to the 70th percentile of market rates. The change in rates will be in place for the last quarter of fiscal year 2022. MSD also requested projected cost increases from Resi at Towson University for increasing the eligibility threshold to 75% of the state median income. Resi's projected increased cost in fiscal year 2022 is $6.7 million. Resi's projected cost for fiscal year 2023 is $20.8 million. Resi's projected increased cost for increasing the provider reimbursement rate to the 70th percentile of market rate in fiscal year 2022 is $9.6 million. Resi's projected additional cost for fiscal year 23 is $31.2 million, and the increased cost in fiscal year 22 and 2023 will be paid for with the American Rescue Plan Child Care Development Block Grant funds. In sum, we today are in a moment of transformation. MSD stands to lead Maryland forward, to implement the once-in-a-generation blueprint for Maryland's future, and to do so hand in hand with the communities we serve. There's no time to wait, so we will do so with urgency and in full recognition of the power and potential of this moment. Again, I appreciate the collaborative relationship with the General Assembly, and I extend our thanks once more to Ms. Wagner for her excellent analysis. I stand ready to answer any and all questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Chowdhry. And do you have anyone else on your team that's speaking today?
I may call on Justin Dayhoff and Stephen Hicks if there's a question that you guys stump me with, but.
Okay, questions from the committee? Well, I have a couple. I just want to talk a little bit more about the child care centers, and knowing that so many people had closed their doors back during the pandemic, and I'm wondering what it looks like as far as people reopening. Are we getting more child care centers? to meet the needs of what we have?
Yeah, so we can talk about some of those stats. Stephen has them memorized, I think, so he can talk about them. But we are seeing reopening, but it's not at the levels that they need to be. I always like to talk about the industry both before the pandemic and after, because it is a mom and pop industry that has struggled, and the pandemic has made it worse. But Stephen, do you want to talk about what the market has, how it has rebounded, and where we are in terms of pre-pandemic versus now?
Sure. Thank you, Superintendent Chowdhry. So we have lost a significant number of childcare programs, as you know, Senator King, particularly family childcare programs. We are pleased to see the latest data as far as the net number of licensing programs. They dropped from pre-pandemic rates of around 8,000 licensed or regulated childcare programs in Maryland down to about 7,200. And the decline continued every single month. But in December, we have started to see a rise in the number of licensed childcare programs. We are hoping that this is a result of the stabilization funds getting into the hands of providers. Our childcare licensing offices are working hard to support new individuals in family childcare homes and center-based homes to open new centers, working quickly as possible during this pandemic, still doing those on-site inspections and streamlining the process as much as legally possible, helping connect with local fire inspections, local use and occupancy permits, etc. I am hoping that when we get the latest data from January, from February, that we will continue to see that rise. 97% of our current our licensed programs are actually operating. That means they've signed a form saying they're taking children and they will follow the health and safety guidance that we've established with the Maryland State Department of Health. Unfortunately, we also know that there is a workforce crisis that is affecting our childcare programs. Some parents are still reluctant to return to childcare. Some parents also are using other resources like family members and staying at home and working, or one person has quit their job and taking care of their child care needs because they are fearful of the pandemic still. So in our grant application that we had for this second round of the ARPA funding, we asked how many programs were at 50% or more capacity or 50% or less capacity for the number of slots that they are licensed for. And it's basically about half and half. So I would say that half of our programs are still not at capacity. And they're on very razor thin margins trying to operate as a business. So that is causing a challenge. We're hoping that the governor's additional infusement of $50 million will help get them over that hump and support the stabilization and continued efforts that we've made.
Okay. Well, let me say, I give you a lot of credit. It's been a hard year for everybody, a very hard year for those in education for sure. So, and has every decision been perfect? I don't think so for anybody. It can't be. But I think we've done the best we can do, and I think you've done a great job. So
Thank you.
I think you always need some positive feedback, don't you?
Thank you.
Senator Zucker has a question.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Just had a quick question about the child care stabilization grants. I know that according to the excellent analysis by Ms. Wagner, that it's on a rolling basis. Is it by check or electronic fund transfer? Like, how quickly is it getting into people's pockets or providers' pockets?
Yeah, Justin, you want to lay out that process? I would like for you to talk about the entire process. I think people forget that there's 2 train stops, MSD and the comptroller's office as well. So if you can talk through that process, Justin. Yeah.
Absolutely. So what we've been doing now is even before we closed the grant application window, we actually began processing the applications themselves. So as they would come in, we would check to make sure that the providers who were submitting the application had signed off on all the assurances that are required for that program, that it is a valid license number. We're confirming all of the information regarding that application. Once that's done and ready, we've already begun, and we've begun prior to closing the application window, of actually processing the payment. So what we do on our end at that point is we go through and into our CCAS system, which I know was also mentioned in the analysis earlier, and that is where we have and process payments for our childcare providers. So we enter the payment information into that. That gets sent down to our accounting systems, and typically within about 48 to 72 hours after that, we've transmitted that information out to the comptroller. Once the comptroller gets it, so to answer the rest of your question, Senator, it depends on how the providers are set up. We encourage them as best we are able to go through direct deposit. Obviously, that's going to be a quicker time frame for them. We provided the direct deposit information, the comptroller's forms and contact information on and with the guidance materials for the stabilization grant to try and help that along. We also reached out to the comptroller's office in advance to give them a heads up that they might be getting some extra direct deposit requests to help the providers. But typically within 2 to 4 business days of the comptroller receiving those payments, if it's ACH, if it's electronic fund transfer, those payments will be issued. It's closer to, I believe, 6 to 10 days if it's for issuing a paper check. The problem though is that's issuing the check, right? So then that is subject to USPS and whatever time that would take to actually get to the provider. It's one of the reasons that we try to encourage providers as best as we could to do direct deposit. We will continue to make that effort and push and make those resources available with the next, should it be approved as part of the budget process, next stabilization round as well. But to the superintendent's point, with that rolling piece, we do have, when he mentioned the 3,000 providers for whom we paid, we're now over 50% of the providers who applied for this have already, we've processed it and sent that information to the comptroller. And that's now, as of right now, actually, that's over the $60 million mark.
Any other questions from the committee? Okay, we have a few people signed up to testify here this afternoon. First, we have Laura Wheeldry from the Maryland Family Network.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, honorable members. Happy Friday. I'm Laura Wheeldry, Executive Director of Maryland Family Network, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify in favor of the FY23 budget for the MSDE Division of Early Childhood. You have my written testimony, and it's Friday, so I will be brief. The budget this year is a good news story, certainly in part due to large infusions of federal aid through ARPA and state investments tied to the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. This is very welcome news, as I'm sure you know, because it means expanded opportunities for young children and their families after an incredibly challenging past 2 years. The administration and the General Assembly are to be commended for your sustained investment in early childhood. While MFN urges support for the proposed budget, we are also deeply concerned about the sustainability of current spending levels, especially to the extent that they are supported by time-limited federal dollars from the American Rescue Plan Act, among other sources. This issue has been well covered in the excellent analysis provided by Ann Wagner. In absence of additional funding, Maryland families could face a dramatic decline in vital services in the out years. Our concerns stand particularly, but not solely, with regard to the Child Care Scholarship Program. As you know very well, so much progress has been made since Senator King's bill and your collective leadership during the 2018 session. Maryland now ranks among the top 10 states in the country in the child care assistance we provide to low-income families. The money behind Child Care Scholarship is our biggest public investment in childcare. Childcare has gotten so much attention, much needed attention over the past 2 years as a critical systemic support for families and for the economy, as well as for the healthy development of young children. and the decrease in enrollment in childcare scholarship at the exact same time that the state is making a tremendous investment in this program is cause for concern. I know that you and your colleagues will consider other legislation this year to strengthen childcare scholarship and support childcare providers, and we look forward to that discussion. So in summary, my two headlines for you today, which are also reflected in your own DLS analysis, are: when families are in such crises, why are fewer of them using childcare scholarship, and what can be done to increase enrollment or expand awareness? We need data, we need analysis about these decreases and forecasting about what we can expect as Maryland rebounds from COVID with state investments of this size and scope. And second, very germane to your role, how do we remain vigilant and committed to the funding increases we see in this year's budget and ensure that families and providers do not experience financial whiplash when ARPA funds are expended? We ask the General Assembly to redouble its vigilance on childcare scholarships fiscal standing, and wherever
I need you to
possible,
wrap up, please.
to enhance MSD's efforts to extend the benefits of high quality programs to more young children, families, and early educators. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have Alethea McCaskill.
Good. I don't know what time it is. Good afternoon.
It's afternoon.
Good afternoon, Senator King and members of the committee. I am Alethea McCaskill, and I am a family child care provider here in Baltimore County. I am also the vice president for the early learning division for SEIU Local 500. So I kind of feel like I'm preaching to the choir. So as many of you very well know, family child care, with some exceptions, is a business with very small profit margins, particularly for those providers who work in low-income neighborhoods or by primarily accepting children receiving the state child care scholarship. My industry is consistently dealing with the higher cost of goods and materials needed to help with the rapid cost of quality child care. The funding in this report will help us with that rapid cost and help stabilize the industry here in Maryland that has spiraled downward pre-pandemic and current status as well, as you will very well see in Exhibit 1 of this report. The numbers are absolutely frightful to my industry. And although I support the 32-page report, my main focus is on the funding being designated to the supplemental block grant discretionary funds. A favorable report will allow families and providers to play a crucial role in Maryland's economy as studies have shown, ensuring families can afford the care they need and contribute to the labor workforce when they choose. Reliable and robust public spending can lower the out-of-pocket cost for families to purchase care, thus reducing the cost of parents having to what they have to pay to engage in work. It'll also support our society by allowing children to have a better outcome developmentally by keeping them safe and holistically healthy, which in turn can reduce, as you know, crime or lower anti-poverty transfers, which is a win for us all. So in closing, I believe early child care education in the largest sense serves many purposes. It is an experience of self-discovery and continual growth. It affects who we are and who we plan to become. These educational experiences builds our character and connects us to the unknown. Without it, our social order and the survival of mankind is very unclear. The education process helps construct knowledge so that we can be multidisciplined beings. And yes, to some degree, education can lead to financial prosperity, but the measure of wealth can only truly be defined by an individual's character, the character that builds right here in our daycares in the very beginning. So I'm just asking that you move favorable on this report. Did I do it?
You did a great job. Great job.
Good.
Thank you.
All right.
Is Ruth Carolina Reyes here? I don't see her on the screen. Okay, I think that does it. Thank you all very much. And Dr. Chowdhry, nice to see you again. We'll be in touch.
Yeah, this was my first one. Thank you. I look forward to many more.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, next on our agenda is the Maryland Stadium Authority. Patrick Frank is our analyst and the agency representatives. We've got Mr. Thomas Kelso, Chairman of the Board of the Maryland Stadium Authority, Mr. Michael Friends, Executive Director, Mr. Gary McQuiggan, Senior Project Executive, Ms. Terry Hazeltine, Executive Director of Maryland Sports, and Mr. David Wraith, Chief Financial Officer. Patrick, take it away.
All right, the Maryland Stadium Authority is an agency that's primarily a non-budgeted funds is supports them. Its staff is funded by non-budgeted funds, and the general and special funds are from the state are for supporting projects like Built to Learn that the Stadium Authority does for the state. As you can see, there's a large expansion in non-budgeted fund spending, and we'll talk about that throughout the analysis. There are two deficiencies that you should be aware of in this budget. First is about $2.7 million deficiency for the Baltimore City Convention Center. The issue here is that there was a lot less revenues during the pandemic, obviously, and so their operating deficit was much larger, and that's split 1/3 for the city and 2/3 for the state. For the state share is just under $2 million. There's also about $300,000 for the Michael Aaron Bush Fund, which provides grants for amateur sports. The chart here, Exhibit 1, is a kind of a summation of what the Stadium Authority is doing. And if you could look at it, there's kind of 4 different parts to it. The first is this blue part. The blue part, these are essentially bond proceeds that are being used for the big construction projects that they're working on. You've got the new one is the supplemental schools, which is also called Built to Learn. Winding down is the Baltimore City Schools program. There's also the Racine Community Develop Program, which is Pimlico and Laurel Park. And finally, last year enacted some legislation to fund a stadium at Hagerstown, and so that is in there. The salmon colored pie pieces here, they essentially are the debt service that funds the big blue part. And so you've got 2 parts to that. One is the state share, which is general and special funds for the, especially the large school programs, but also the others. And also you've got in the Baltimore City School construction program, the arrangement is such that the state pays 1/3 or $20 million a year for debt service, and the other $40 million are paid by the schools and the city. This section over here, this first block, that's about 5% of the budget. That's the operations of the Stadium Authority. That's the stadiums, their administration, things like that. And then there are other reversible funds for Project Core, and there are general funds, like I said earlier, for the convention centers and some other smaller projects. So that's kind of the summary of the budget. And now what we'll talk about is just these big projects. There is, just for your information, there's a lot more detail about this, and there's some text with it as well, but I will go ahead and skip on to the Baltimore City School replacement. A lot of our analyses have performance indicators, if you will. Well, for the Stadium Authority is what have you built for me lately? And what we have here is a list of all of the Baltimore City schools. As you can see, most of them are open, and it's winding down, as only these last 4 here are, or I do not have the school construction, and there's one where the school is ready, but it's still got some demolition work to go. So they are, like I said, this is winding down, and they'll finish this off. But before they finish it, they're going to point out that they've only spent $974 million of par value has been issued. They're up to $1.1 billion, so there still is some capacity. And with that additional capacity, they are going to issue another issuance sometime early in this year. And the debt service for that is shown in these purple lines here. 2 things are happening with this. And the first part of the sale is since interest rates are low, they're going to refund some of the prior bond sales, and with that issue new debt. Now, generally, when you do a refunding, you pat yourself on the back because you just saved yourself some money. But since this is a flat $60 million payment, what refunding does is it allows you to actually issue more debt and to do more projects. So this refunding is going to be paying for more projects. Also, on the last 2 years, these last 2 purple bars here, that is a special kind of sale that they're doing in which they're extending the life of this And what they'll do is these are bonds that pay no debt service, and then there's two debt service payments at the end until the last 2 years of the bond. They're called capital appreciation bonds. You don't see them very often, but they're ideal in this situation actually. And so that's how the Stadium Authority will get a little bit more work done in the Baltimore City School program. As you all know, Built to Learn was enacted, and now it is happening. This table here, exhibit number 6, shows that there was one issuance already, which generated $286 million. There's also another $500 million issuance planned. Now, I should mention here that that planned amount may be, the actual amount may be a little bit less. And the issue here is that the Stadium Authority doesn't want to get too far ahead of itself. So it's only going to issue debt for projects that have been approved by the IAC. And so that way, as the IAC approves, they'll issue the bonds and then work on a cash flow basis like that. So the size of issuance may be advantageous to get as much in as we can now while interest rates are low. But if they do reduce the bond sale, it doesn't mean the project is doing less. It just means it's not doing all that in the current year. As I mentioned earlier, the Pimlico and Laurel Park are getting some revenues too. The deal that was made a few years back was that $17 million in lottery revenues would be used each year to pay debt service for the improvements at the facilities, and then the lottery would give up some of its own revenues. In total, looks like the state will use about $527 million in lottery revenues and get back $348 million. This allows the more work to be done at these parks. There is one issue I'd like to raise, and that's come up recently, and that has to do with Laurel Park. There have been some fatalities at Laurel Park. There also was the ground was redone because there was some concerns that the ground was one of the reasons for that. Again, the question we have for the Stadium Authority is to what extent is this going to add projects? I mean, is this issue resolved now? And to what extent is this going to have any additional costs as they move forward and renovate the facility? Also, as I mentioned earlier, there's Hagerstown got some money this year. I think it's about, $59.5 million in par value. There is an issuance planned. I have to say that this is about as fast as I've ever seen a capital project move. There should be an issuance fairly soon coming up, and that's going to raise, they think, altogether about $85 million almost for this stadium in Hagerstown. So that seems to be moving forward very quickly. Final issue that I'd like to talk about has to do with the overall debt of the Stadium Authority. As you can see from this exhibit over here, the total authorizations are $4.1 million. That's about $400 million in state debt and another $3.7 million in non-state debt that supports like I said, the horse racing facilities in the 2 schools. And there is going to be, we anticipate, legislation to increase that capacity by another $1.4 billion. It's in 2 parts. One is $1.2 billion for Camden Yards, which would give $600 million each to the Orioles and the Ravens for improvements. They're getting close to the end of the leases here, and what the strategy is for the Stadium Authority is to get them in a long-term lease and offer incentives that improve the stadiums for them. Also, is what they call the Sports and Entertainment Facility Financing Fund, and that is for more minor league stadiums like the one in Hagerstown. I just want to say there's a typo in here in which I do mention Major League. When I looked at this, I think apparently it was an early draft of the bill, and that's been amended now. I just want to be clear about that. So this is only for minor league facilities, and I'll get that corrected in the final version of this. And finally, we would concur with the governor's allowance, and that concludes my presentation. I can take questions.
Thanks, Patrick. Okay, Mr. Thomas Kelso.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. How are you?
I'm good.
Great to see you today.
Friday afternoon. Happy to have you here.
Yes, we have a short presentation prepared, and I'd turn it over to Mike Friends. But I don't know that it's going to say a whole lot different than Patrick's budget write-up. And, so if you, for the sake of time, if you'd like to just go to Q&A, we're happy to do that.
Well, how long will the presentation go?
Well, it should be short. However, it's in your material, so it was really our plan just to go to questions unless you
Okay.
would like us to go through the presentation.
Okay, we're good. Questions from the committee? I don't see any. Oh, Senator Elfrith.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I was just pointing out Senator Corderman might have a question.
Yes.
Thank you.
I just saw your hand up.
More just a thank you to the Stadium Authority. As Patrick has mentioned, our project is moving quite quickly, and we're very appreciative of everything the Stadium Authority has done in our community. I have bi-weekly calls with them, and they've been nothing but exemplary. So very much appreciated everything the Stadium Authority has done. Thank you to the committee again for support of that legislation last year. But just wanted to thank the Stadium Authority for all their efforts in Hagerstown. And we've already seen almost $40 million of investment that's going in and around that facility right now, and we don't even have a shovel in the ground yet. So we're very excited about it. So thank you again for all your efforts. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Director Friends.
Senator, we thank you for all the confidence that the city of Hagerstown and the group that put everything together and you had in the Stadium Authority, and it's a great Stadium Authority project.
Yes. Thank you again.
Okay. Mr. Kelso, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
Senator, we could say have a great weekend.
That's really good. You have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for your time today. Look forward
Thank
to
you.
seeing you soon.
Okay. Okay, last and as I said, certainly not least, we have Maryland Public Broadcasting Commission. Samuel Quist is our budget analyst, and Mr. Larry Unger, President and Chief Executive Officer from MPT, is with us, along with Mr. Stephen Shupak, Ms. Suzanne Schwartman, Mr. Travis Mitchell, and Ms. Colette Culla? Close? Okay. Anyway, Sam, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you and good morning. I will share the presentation. You'll see the DLS analysis document on your screen. This is for the Maryland Public Broadcasting Commission, as you mentioned, or Maryland Public Television, as they're commonly known. The fiscal 23 allowance totals $32.8 million. This is a 6.5% decrease from the fiscal 22 working appropriation. This decrease is primarily due to reimbursable fund spending in the prior fiscal year. There was a budget amendment from the Maryland State Department of Education totaling approximately $3.9 million for a grant related to online course development. Also not reflected in this data due to the timing of its processing, there was a second reimbursable fund amendment of about $1.9 million from the Maryland Department of Health for some television production. Moving on to the overview of agency spending exhibit in the fiscal 23 allowance. As you can see, approximately a little over half of the budget covers personnel expenses. The other half, just under one half, covers the operating expenses for Maryland Public Television. There's about 24%, which covers various television production contracts and broadcasting contracts, and 13% of the budget is for PBS and other television dues, subscriptions, and licensing. Moving on to Exhibit 2 on the following page, this shows the main changes in the budget. Again, largest being a decrease in reimbursable funds for the MSDE course development grant. The largest increase in the budget is related to personnel expenses. Personnel expenses increased by a total of $782,000, with the largest component of this being the implementation of a new salary plan for the agency. And moving to the personnel data summary, so there are 145 regular positions funded in the FY23 budget. This is unchanged from the previous year. There are also 12.7 contractual full-time equivalents. This is an increase of 0.5 contractual positions. And DLS notes that the current vacancies are at approximately 16 at the end of calendar 21, which is about 9.6 higher than the turnover expectancy rate. Moving to the key observations section, there are three main managing for results performance measures for the agency that the analysis notes. The first is for the membership and member contributions for Maryland Public Television. Both of these have increased over the past 2 consecutive fiscal years, and the number of member contributions, which is tied to the special fund revenue from that portion of the budget, has increased despite initial concern that some of the economic uncertainty and impacts from the pandemic would have an impact on that. But as you can see in the chart, that performed higher than anticipated originally. The next chart shows the number of original programming produced by MPT over the past 5 fiscal years. This has decreased over the past 2 years due to some negative impacts of the pandemic on production and some interruptions. However, MPT has indicated that they've taken steps to adapt to some of the challenges caused by the pandemic, and they're working on new programming during the current fiscal year, which I'm sure they'll elaborate more on in their presentation. Exhibit number 5 shows the viewership ratings for Maryland Public Television. This is as estimated by the Nielsen's television rating agency. The ratings have increased over the past 2 fiscal years, and this is consistent with data that they have on all television viewership as a whole, which has increased over the past fiscal years. This is kind of an interesting impact of the pandemic. As more people are spending more time at home, television viewership has gone up as more people are exploring additional entertainment options at home. Finally, the presentation, DLS is recommending that the committees concur with the governor's allowance, and that concludes the DLS presentation, and I can take any questions from the committee.
Okay, any questions from the committee? I don't see any. Mr. Unger, do you want to go first, or what order do you want to go in?
Yes, I'd like to begin, and we're going to be pretty brief. Good afternoon, and thank you all for this time to speak about the Maryland Public Broadcasting Commission and for all the support that you've provided over many years. And of course, we thank our fine analyst, Mr. Quist. Now, it's lunchtime. I'm sure you all are just about ready to go. So
we look hungry.
A little bit. I know I am. So I would like to mention that our 2 national documentaries, one on Harriet Tubman and one on Frederick Douglass, are now complete. We'll begin screenings around the state very soon, and the programs will air nationally on PBS this fall. We're very proud of these films, and once again, thank the legislature for their support. As usual, we've prepared a relatively short video describing what MPT has accomplished in the past year, and with a bit of luck, I'll be able to play that for you now. Just bear with me while I attempt to share my screen.
"2021 was a year of extraordinary change. From a pandemic that has changed nearly every aspect of our daily lives, to a social justice movement that aims to challenge long-standing bias. But one thing that hasn't changed is our mission to serve our community as a dependable source of news and critical information, as a classroom helper and trusted confidant, as neighbor and advocate. Because our stories are your stories."
MPT brings you the best of broadcast through 4 outstanding channels. Seamless streaming, live and on demand with MPT Passport. and made-for-mobile content that uplifts and inspires viewers from our 6-state viewing audience and beyond. In concert with our robust social media presence, MPT is committed to keeping residents informed and engaged at home, online, and everywhere in between.
Bringing home 7 local Emmy Awards in 2021, MPT consistently delivers insightful, high-quality programs, including local news and public affairs with Direct Connection and State Circle, now celebrating 40 years of up-close and in-depth coverage of the state legislature.
Tonight, we will hear from the legislature's presiding officers.
We explore arts and culture with time-honored mainstays, including Ways to Pay for College, Maryland Farm and Harvest, Outdoors Maryland, and Artworks, which partnered with the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra in June to honor the BSO's legendary maestro with Marin Alsop, a live gala celebration.
And new last fall, MPT presented the Maryland 5-Star at Fair Hill, harnessing Marylanders' enthusiasm for a popular state pastime. We studied the nuts and bolts of the manufacturing industry with Made in Maryland and journeyed to some of the state's most pristine natural resources with Destination Maryland.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome into the MPT Sports Desk.
The MPT Sports Desk cheered on Bowie State against rivals Virginia State University, and will cover the CIAA men's and women's basketball tournament in Baltimore this February.
It's going to have a tremendous impact on the state of Maryland and the entire region.
In addition to our local programming, viewers across the country enjoy national favorites such as My Greek Table, To Dine For with Kate Sullivan, Motor Week, and Stephen Reichland's Project Fire.
We dig into environmental issues with our highly popular Chesapeake Bay Week and delve into social issues with HBCU Week, which celebrates the hard-earned achievements of historically Black colleges and universities and examines the role of HBCUs in the broader social justice movement.
At Maryland Public Television, we're dedicated to providing dialogue and content that causes us to think critically, causes us to probe our better selves, and to come out of our comfort zone to discuss some very difficult topics with the goal of being unified at the very end.
As part of a larger initiative, HBCU Week and Standing Against Racism were designed to address social justice reform with stimulating programs and documentaries, thoughtful interviews, and lively online debate with residents and community leaders through Conversations for Change.
It's never been more important to hear from communities that are often marginalized, that no one wants to hear from them. And you play a vital role in getting their voices heard.
MPT's Digital Studios goes below the surface to explore a wide range of topics with web-exclusive interviews from The Dig. And our high-powered advertising agency helps Maryland state agencies spread the word about critical issues, such as rent assistance, addiction, and COVID, on nearly every media platform throughout the state.
To learn more, visit rentrelief.maryland.gov.
The ongoing public health crisis meant the continuation of our educational program, At Home Learning, and a new initiative, Your Digital Backpack, which provides critical hands-on resources for remote learners and educators alike. In collaboration with our acclaimed online education portal, ThinkPort, and Ready to Learn, our youngest viewers were able to take advantage of comprehensive multimedia assets and common learning tools throughout the pandemic school year.
We found learning loss was a huge issue, and public television was very uniquely set to help fill the void there. It was greatly appreciated from parents all over the state, including myself and my wife.
Through crisis and calm, celebration and social change, our goal to inform, entertain, and inspire never changes, because our stories are your stories. And now, enjoy the best of primetime PBS.
You haven't seen anything yet.
This is what it's all about.
Oh my goodness.
MPT. Be informed, be entertained, be inspired.
Well, I think that pretty much gives you the story a lot better than I could have in twice the time. So we're happy to respond to any questions you may have.
Thank you. Well done as always. Any questions from the committee? I think we're good.
Once again, I just can't thank you all enough for all the support. It has made a huge difference here.
Good, good. Well, you never disappoint, I'll tell you that.
Thank you. All right, have a
Thank you
wonderful
all.
lunch.
Yes, have a good weekend.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.